Alexandra Mikheeva was born approximately in 1875 in the village of Molodikovo of Ruza county of Moscow province to a peasant's family. In her youth, Alexandra Nikitishna was accepted to the Trinity Hereditary Zosimis female hermitage, where she bore obedience both at common work and in the bond. By 1913, in the monastery there were about 280 nuns. There was a place of receipt, a poorhouse, and a hospital. The year 1917 became crucial in the history of Zosimis hermitage. The monastery was closed, but nuns were not expelled. In September 1920, they organized an agricultural atoll and managed to survive for 8 more years. Services in the church continued. In May 1929, the monastery was liquidated, while both nuns and novices were expelled from the hermitage that was plundered and defiled. After brethren buildings were closed, nuns settled in nearby villages and earned a living by labor. In summer they often worked on peasants. In winter they did needlework to order, made blankets, sewed, knitted stockings and laces. With no doubt, all nuns went to church. Many of them read Psalter for the dead, some of them sang in a choir. In the villages, priests invited former nuns to take part in public prayers during holidays in the villages. Returning to her native village of Molodikovo and helping her mother with her household, nun Alexandra Mikheeva was not an exception. In the indictment, it was pointed out that Mikheeva lives in the house of Prof. Karapin, who was exiled by the OGPU for anti-Soviet activity and had close connection with him. There is strong possibility that the nun worked at the Church of the Intercession of Our Lady of Kremichisky churchyard, sang in a choir and took part in public prayers performed by Father Ian Karapin in the villages. Possibly, nun Alexandra also served as a psalmist, as in the list of clergymen of Mozaisk Vika district in 1923 to 1925. Only priest Ian Karapin was mentioned at the Intercession Church. During the Soviet regime, nun Alexandra Mikheeva was deprived of voting rights. In spring 1931, priest of the Church of the Intercession of Our Lady of Kremichisky churchyard, Ian Karapin was arrested and exiled. At the same time, the authorities decided to close the Cathedral of the Resurrection of Christ in the town of Ruza and make it a cultural center. Faithful people tried to protect the church. One of them was nun Alexander. On the 19th of May the same year, during mass persecutions of clergy, the nun was arrested by the OGPU according to the group case of Abbess Tamara Likhachova and others. Apart from the nun Alexander, Abbess Tamara Likhachova, as well as nuns Ludmila Kuzmina, Elena Marfeva, and Anna Molchanova were involved in the case. During the investigation, the convicted were imprisoned in the town of Ruza. In the indictment, nun Alexandra Mikheeva was accused in systematic anti-Soviet agitation among female peasants who visited them using religion. Among peasants, she said, God is already on the doorstep with the cross. In spring 1931, during their collectivization, she agitated against collective farms. She uses a middle-class female peasant Krylova for anti-Soviet agitation. She agitated against the events of the Soviet authorities on the closure of the cathedral. It should be pointed out that during the interrogation, nun Alexandra Mikheeva didn't even hide her negative attitude toward the events that happened. In Zosimis hermitage, I worked in the barn both before the war of 1915 and after, until 1928, while since 1928 I live in the village of Molodikovo. I help my mother with her household. As nun, I know priest Karapin, who I often visited, also drinking tea with him. Now he is exiled to a concentration camps by the OGPU for 5 years. As nun, in the village of Molodikovo, I visited my fellow peasants and talked to them on religious and political issues. As a faithful person, I think that the authorities do something wrong oppressing religion. I talked about this with peasants. Also among them I spoke that the authorities excruciated peasants with different types of provision. Being in the village of Fyodorovka of North Minsk district in 1930, in a group of peasants, I said to the chairman of that village council, "We're fleecing peasants." The peasants who were there agreed with me at once. Like the rest of the nuns who were involved in the case, Alexandra Mikheeva didn't plead guilty. Already on the 10th of June 1931, according to the 58th article, paragraph 10 of the Criminal Code of Russia, for systematic anti-Soviet agitation aimed on disruption of the events of the Soviet authorities in the village, using religion and treating female presence in anti-Soviet way, the OGPU Troika of Moscow region sentenced nun Alexandra Mikheeva to 5 years of exile in a Lambak camp, replacing it with the exile to Kazakhstan on the same duration from the 20th of May 1931. On the 20th of May 1931, there was the main persecution of inhabitants of former Zosimus Hermitage. By this very moment, 60 people from the monastery who were repressed in 1931 to 1932 are known. Very few were bound to return. One of them was nun Alexandra Mikheeva, who survived in the exile and labor camps, and on the 8th of October 1954, in the town of Sadria repressed, along with other former inhabitants of the Trinity Hodijatra Zosimus Hermitage, signed a petition to open a church in their native monastery. According to the message of nun Elena Shaverna, the mundane path of nun Alexandra Mikheeva ended between the 8th of October 1954 and the 17th of February 1955, almost at the age of 80. During her lifetime, she passed through the hearth of trials without falling into temptation of godless time, but testing the commandments of God without betrayal of humanistic vows. On the 31st of January 1994, Alexandra Mikheeva was rehabilitated by the prosecutor's office in Moscow region.